So I feel really lucky today. I was able to spend a lot of time with a close friend on a long drive, some traffic jams, some other events along the way. And this is one of my favorite things to be able to do with a friend, long time in a car together, sometimes music, sometimes not music, just the ability to chat, sometimes not chat, respond, listen, interact, and just catch up on old stories, tell new stories, solve all the world's biggest problems. Absolutely one of my favorite things to do. And while this was going on, I was able to talk about a lot of stuff. A couple things I wanted to mention here, but I think we'll wait till the end. But anyway, this today reminded me of the layover test, which essentially is a question of, would you want to be stuck with somebody in an airport during a layover for maybe an indefinite or undefined period of time? And I also like to think of this as like the traffic jam test or the road trip test. But fundamentally, the element is there's just not a lot of other things for the two of you to do other than maybe interact, chat, feel comfortable in silence next to one another. And I really like this exercise. I originally heard about it in the context of, building small teams. And I've heard it pop up other times in terms of interviews and employment, looking for new employees, assessment of soft skills and things like that. What I was particularly thinking about was, the layover test in reflection of myself. And this is not to give myself a compliment. Most of the time, my answer for the layover test is yes. I like hearing other people's stories, even if they're contrary to mine. Learning about life events that are outside of my own senses and experience is always fascinating to me. And again, I'm not saying this as a compliment at all, like I'm some very welcoming or completely accepting person. I just find those things pretty damn interesting. But at the same time, as I was thinking about this, I wonder if it makes me gullible at times. Gullible might not be the right word here, but maybe a little bit a hair too optimistic in cases to want to accept somebody, or my interest just in learning about somebody overlooks the impact of potentially negative qualities or characteristics of that person. So I thought about this a lot today. And I thought about that one way I've probably insulated myself from this is, while I generally enjoy learning about other people's experiences, I'm pretty slow, I think, generally to share more or share things that are not superficial with somebody at first. I've had friends in the past who are so forthcoming. I think it's so interesting, that quality in people, just to almost like the filter is just totally turned off for them. I was listening to another book today, and the book was discussing how our brain does or doesn't trigger actions that our body carries out, or precipitating thoughts after that first sort of pre-initiation thought to have an action. And the chapter of the book was talking about inhibiting those thoughts or those actions, and that the resources required to inhibit an action are much greater in children compared to adults. So basically saying that the child's brain has to do a lot more work in order to inhibit an action. So that was so interesting. Versus an adult's brain doesn't need to do as much. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. Haven't continued further in the book. My guesses would be things like, one would just be like the pattern of it, the habit of it, maybe other social norms that we've picked up on or beliefs that we have. General impulse control is probably greater, most adults, not all of them, than children. But anyway, the reason I was thinking about this in terms of people who are forthcoming, I just think it's so interesting, because I think fundamentally that's a more challenging thing to do as an adult. Because I think it's easier as an adult to sort of stop your instincts. But the layover test, I think, is an interesting one for me because, like I said, my goal, and while I know I like learning about other people, my default setting isn't necessarily to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, but it's to the interest in learning, I think, sometimes overpowers the judgment and assessment criteria that would say, hey, you've noticed some things about this person during the layover test or before initiating the layover test, and maybe it isn't, in your best interest to hang out with them during this long period of time with not much else to do. Maybe they're not the best person for you to be around. So I think one way to insulate for that is just to share just the, while I'm happy to receive all the information, to only share this superficial stuff. And that's not what today's car ride with my friend was like. We talked about a lot of different things. But I like that layover test one. And it kind of got me thinking about when you are considering who to spend time with a lot. I would fill that with most of, if only, the people who pass your layover test. So that's a really special thing. I think as much as it is a special thing to be able to sit with somebody and have an engaging conversation and want to listen to them and notice that they also listen and interact with you, to be able to sit in silence with somebody is something quite special and rare in a lot of cases. Just to have the awkwardness of the silence, the peacefulness of the silence, the mystery of the silence. Where does this conversation go next? And to feel comfortable with that, people that you can find and do that with, I think are pretty unique and special indeed. And again, I think the comfortableness is really important. If you're sitting in silence with somebody and you're uncomfortable, sure, I'm sure you could continue to sit in silence for a long time, but it should be something that's enjoyable, especially if it's somebody for you that passes the layover test. So I spent a lot of time thinking about that today. Curious, how does it relate for you? Is that something you even ever think about? And this was more and more going down that path of thinking about who in our life do we give more or less energy to and why. I've been thinking about that a little bit more lately, and where do I direct that energy? But that was really it. Spent today driving, skiing, which was very cool. And one of the things I was thinking about while I was skiing is just I'm always just I'm interested in how humans their relationship with just the majesty and how drastic nature is. Skiing is such an interesting thing. And the other thing I noticed while I was skiing is like how often do you look up? And I'm not saying you should look up at the sky the entire your time you're bombing down a hill like a maniac. But I spent a couple of moments. I've been doing this more and more lately. So I'm outside. I always feel like I'm either looking straight ahead, left, right, or down. Or, at my phone. Right, I'm only human. But I try to look outside or look up every time I go outside. And it's just so interesting. There's something that just happens in your brain. Not dizziness, not disorientation, but maybe that is what it is. It's just a really simple physiological explanation. But there's just something really special, I feel like, that happens when you look up. It feels uplifting. Sorry, there's not a better term there for that for me right now. It's just exciting. It's a different perspective. It's getting ready to ski down today, top of the hill, mountain, whatever. I just took a couple seconds at the start of each run to look up, scan the entire area, the sky, the valley, the rest of the mountain. It's beautiful up there. Spend so much time looking down at the ground. But I just think it's so interesting how people interact with, how we interact with this, this beautiful vista at the top of the mountain, the entire mountain itself, the contrast of the snow and the trees and looking into the valley. So it's just, I don't know, how do we always interact with that? And I guess you can't find yourself in awe and wonder of it all the time. Maybe you can. But it is so easy to take for granted. And again, we've talked about this a lot. The more time I spend outside in nature, it's not always these very dramatic, drastic scenes on top of a mountain. Sometimes it's just the smallest things in nature. It really does do wonders for us to think about, because it is so much just bigger than us. it's a nice thing to just fill you up with, because it's always there. It's always available. Even in the shittiest circumstances of weather. Well, one of the things we talked about a lot today, Killer Bluebird Day, was just growing up skiing on the East Coast. You don't get many sunny days skiing or many winter days, but even just to accept the fact that the persistence of winter and the grayness of winter, the coldness, the weather that just flows in and out, transitioning from these snowy days to clear days and just all of it. It's pretty fantastic, especially just how much bigger it is than us. A couple preliminary thoughts from this one, and hopefully I'm maybe going to pick some of these and move forward into something deeper, but that was the day. It's a really awesome day. If I was still doing the gratitude, grateful for the time that I got to spend talking to a friend in a traffic jam. Wouldn't change that for the world. So that's a pretty damn good day. More tomorrow.